Jai Gurudev. Contemporary World Politics. Chapter 4, International Organizations. Overview. In this chapter, we shall discuss the role of international organizations after the collapse of the Soviet Union. We shall examine how in this emerging world there were calls for the restructuring of international organizations to cope with the various new challenges, including the rise of US power. The potential reform of the United Nations Security Council is an interesting case of the reform process and its difficulties. We then turn to India's involvement in the UN and its view of Security Council reforms. The chapter closes by asking if the UN can play any role in dealing with a world dominated by one superpower. In this chapter, we also look at some other transnational organizations that are playing a crucial role. This is the United Nations logo. The emblem has a world map with olive branches around it, signifying world peace. Why international organizations? Read the two cartoons in this page. Both the cartoons comment on the ineffectiveness of the United Nations organization, usually referred to as the UN. In the Lebanon crisis in 2006, both the cartoons represent the kind of opinions that we often hear about the UN. On the other hand, we also find that the UN is generally regarded as the most important international organization in today's world. In the eyes of many people all over the world, it is indispensable and represents the great hope of humanity for peace and progress. Why do we then need organizations like the UN? Let us hear two insiders. The United Nations was not created to take humanity to heaven, but to save it from hell. Dag Hammarskjöld, the UN's second Secretary General. Talking shop. Yes, there are a lot of speeches and meetings at the UN, especially during the annual sessions of the General Assembly. But as Churchill put it, jaw is better than war. Isn't it better to have one place where all countries in the world can get together, bore each other sometimes with their words rather than bore holes into each other on the battlefield? Shashi Tharoor, the former UN Under Secretary General for Communications and Public Information. These two quotes suggest something important. International organizations are not the answer to everything, but they are important. International organizations help with matters of war and peace. They also help countries cooperate to make better living conditions for us all. Countries have conflicts and differences with each other. That doesn't necessarily mean they must go to war to deal with their antagonisms. They can instead discuss contentious issues and find peaceful solutions. Indeed, even though this is rarely noticed, most conflicts and differences are resolved without going to war. The role of an international organization can be important in this context. An international organization is not a super state with authority over its members. It is created by and responds to states. It comes into being when states agree to its creation. Once created, it can help member states resolve their problems peacefully. International organizations are helpful in another way. Nations can usually see that there are some things they must do together. There are issues that are so challenging and they can only be dealt with when everyone works together. Disease is an example. Some diseases can only be eradicated if everyone in the world cooperates in inoculating or vaccinating their populations. Or take global warming and its effects. As temperatures rise because of the increase in greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, there is a danger that sea levels will also rise, thereby submerging many coastal areas of the world, including huge cities. Of course, each country can try to find its own solution to the effects of global warming, but in the end, a more effective approach is to stop the warming itself. This requires at least all the major industrial powers to cooperate. Unfortunately, recognizing the need for cooperation and actually cooperating are two different things. Nations can recognize the need to cooperate but cannot always agree on how best to do so, how to share the costs of cooperating, how to make sure that the benefits of cooperating are justly divided, and how to ensure that others do not break their end of the bargain and cheat on an agreement. An international organization can help produce information and ideas about how to cooperate. It can provide mechanisms, rules, and a bureaucracy to help members have more confidence that costs will be shared properly, that the benefits will be fairly divided, and that once a member joins an agreement, it will honor the terms and conditions of the agreement. With the end of the Cold War, we can see that the UN may have a slightly different role. As the United Nations and its allies emerged victorious, there was concern amongst many governments and peoples that the Western countries led by the US would be so powerful that there would be no check against their wishes and desires. Can the UN serve to promote dialogue and discussion with the US in particular, and could it limit the power of the American government? We shall try to answer this question and at the end of the chapter. Evolution of the UN. The First World War encouraged the world to invest in an international organization to deal with conflict. Many believes that such an organization would help the world to avoid war. As a result, the League of Nations was born. However, despite its initial success, it could not prevent the Second World War 1939 to 1945. Many more people died and were wounded in this war and than ever before. The UN was founded as a successor to the League of Nations. It was established in 1945, immediately after the Second World War. The organization was set up through the signing of the United Nations Charter by 51 states. It tried to achieve what the League could not between the two world wars. The UN's objective is to prevent international conflict and to facilitate cooperation among states. It was founded with the hope that it would act to stop the conflicts between states escalating into war, and if war broke out, to limit the extent of hostilities. Furthermore, since conflicts often arose from the lack of social and economic development, the UN was intended to bring countries together to improve the prospects of social and economic development all over the world. By 2011, the UN had 193 member states. These included almost all independent states. In the UN General Assembly, all members have one vote each. In the UN Security Council, there are 5 permanent members. These are the United States, Russia, United Kingdom, France, and China. These states were selected as permanent members as they were the most powerful immediately after the Second World War and because they constituted the victors in the war. The UN's most visible public figure and the representative head is the Secretary General. The present Secretary General is Antonio Guterres. He is the 9th Secretary General of the UN. He took over as the Secretary General on 1st of January 2017. He was the Prime Minister of Portugal from 1995 to 2002 and the UN High Commissioner for Refugees 2005 to 2015. The UN consists of many different structures and agencies. War and peace and differences between member states are discussed in General Assembly as well as the Security Council. Social and economic issues are dealt with by many agencies including the World Health Organization, the United Nations Development Programme UNDP, the United Nations Human Rights Commission UNHRC, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees UNHCR, the United Nations Children's Fund UNICEF, and the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization UNESCO, among others. Reform of the UN after the Cold War. Reform and improvement are fundamental to any organization to serve the needs of a changing environment. The UN is no exception. In recent years, there have been demands for reform of the world body. However, there is little clarity and consensus on the nature of reform. Two basic kinds of reforms face the UN: reform of the organization's structures and processes, and a review of the issues that fall within the jurisdiction of the organization. Almost everyone is agreed that both aspects of reform are necessary. What they cannot agree on is precisely what is to be done, how it is to be done, and when it is to be done. On the reform of structures and processes, the biggest discussion has been on the functioning of the Security Council. Related to this has been the demand for an increase in the UN Security Council's permanent and non-permanent membership so that the realities of contemporary world politics are better reflected in the structure of the organization. In particular, there are proposals to increase membership from Asia, Africa, and South America. Beyond this, the US and other Western countries want improvements in the UN's budgetary procedures and its administration. On the issues to be given greater priority or to be brought within the jurisdiction of the UN, some countries and experts want the organization to play a greater or more effective role in peace and security missions, while others want its role to be confined to development and humanitarian work, health, education, environment, population control, human rights, gender, and social justice. Let us look at both sets of reforms with an emphasis on reform of the structures and processes. The UN was established in 1945, immediately after the Second World War. The way it was organized and the way it functioned reflected the realities of world politics after the Second World War. After the Cold War, those realities are different. Here are some of the changes that have occurred. The Soviet Union has collapsed. The US is the strongest power. The relationship between Russia, the successor of the Soviet Union, and the US is much more cooperative. China is fast emerging as a great power, and India also is growing rapidly. The economies of Asia are growing at an unprecedented rate. Many new countries have joined the UN as they became independent from the Soviet Union or former communist states in Eastern Europe. A whole new set of challenges confronts the world: genocide, civil war, ethnic conflict, terrorism, nuclear proliferation, climate change, environmental degradation, epidemics. In this situation, in 1989, as the Cold War was ending, the question facing the world was: is the UN doing enough? Is it equipped to do what is required? What should it be doing and how? What reforms are necessary to make it work better? For the past decade and a half, member states have been trying to find satisfactory and practical answers to these questions. Reform of structures and processes. While the case for reform has widespread support, getting agreement on what to do is difficult. Let us examine the debate over reform of the UN Security Council. In 1992, the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution. The resolution reflected three main complaints. The Security Council no longer represents contemporary political realities. Its decisions reflect only Western values and interests and are dominated by a few powers. It lacks equitable representation. In view of these growing demands for the restructuring of the UN, on 1st of January 1997, the UN Secretary General Kofi Annan initiated an inquiry into how UN should be reformed. How, for instance, should new Security Council members be chosen? In the years since then, the following are just some of the criteria that have been proposed for new permanent and non-permanent members of the Security Council. A new member, it has suggested, should be a major economic power, a major military power, a substantial contributor to the UN budget, a big nation in terms of its population, a nation that respects democracy and human rights, a country that could make the Council more representative of the world's diversity in terms of geography, economic systems, and culture. Clearly, each of these criteria has some validity. Governments saw advantages in some criteria and disadvantages in others, depending on their interests and aspirations. Even if they had no desire to be members themselves, countries could see that the criteria were problematic. How big an economic or military power did you have to be to qualify for Security Council membership? What level of budget contribution would enable a state to buy its way into the Council? Was a big population an asset or a liability for a country trying to play a bigger role in the world? If respect for democracy and human rights was the criteria, countries with excellent records would be in line to be members, but would they be effective as Council members? Furthermore, how was the matter of representation to be resolved? Did equitable representation in geographical terms mean that there should be one seat each from Asia, Africa, and Latin America and the Caribbean? Should the representation, on the other hand, be by regions or subregions rather than continents? Why should the issue of equitable representation be decided by geography? Why not by levels of economic development? Why not, in other words, give more seats to members of the developing world? Even here, there are difficulties. The developing world consists of countries at many different levels of development. What about culture? Should different cultures or civilizations be given representation in a more balanced way? How does one divide the world by civilizations or cultures, given that nations have so many cultural streams within their borders? A related issue was to change the nature of membership altogether. Some insisted, for instance, that the veto power of the 5 permanent members be abolished. Many perceived the veto to be in conflict with the concept of democracy and sovereign equality in the UN and thought that the veto was no longer right or relevant. In the Security Council, there are 5 permanent members and 10 non-permanent members. The Charter gave the permanent members a privileged position to bring about stability in the world after the Second World War. The main privileges of the 5 permanent members are permanency and the veto power. The non-permanent members serve for only 2 years at a time and give way after that period to newly elected members. A country cannot be re-elected immediately after completing a term of 2 years. The non-permanent members are elected in a manner so that they represent all continents of the world. Most importantly, the non-permanent members do not have the veto power. What is the veto power? In taking decisions, the Security Council proceeds by voting. All members have one vote. However, the permanent members can vote in a negative manner, so that even if all other permanent and non-permanent members vote for a particular decision, any permanent member's negative vote can stall the decision. This negative vote is the veto. While there has been a move to abolish or modify the veto system, there is also a realization that the permanent members are unlikely to agree to such a reform. Also, the world may not be ready for such a radical step even though the Cold War is over. Without the veto, there is the danger, as in 1945, that the great powers would lose interest in the world body, that they would do what they pleased outside it, and that without their support and involvement, the body would be ineffective. Jurisdiction of the UN. The question of membership is a serious one. In addition, though there are more substantial issues before the world, as the UN completed 60 years of its existence, the heads of all the member states met in September 2005 to celebrate the anniversary and review the situation. The leaders in this meeting decided that the following steps should be taken to make the UN more relevant in the changing context: creation of a peace building commission, acceptance of the responsibility of the international community in case of failures of national governments to protect their own citizens from atrocities, establishment of a Human Rights Council operational since 19 June 2006, agreements to achieve the Millennium Development Goals (MDGs), condemnation of terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, creation of a democracy fund, an agreement to wind up the trusteeship council. It is not hard to see that these are equally contentious issues for the UN. What should a peace building commission do? There are any number of conflicts all over the world. Which ones should it intervene in? Is it possible or even desirable for it to intervene in each and every conflict? Similarly, what is the responsibility of the international community in dealing with atrocities? What are human rights, and who should determine the level of human rights violations and the course of action to be taken when they are violated? Given that so many countries are still part of the developing world, how realistic is it for the UN to achieve an ambitious set of goals such as those listed in the Sustainable Development Goals? Can there be agreement on a definition of terrorism? How shall the UN use funds to promote democracy, and so on? India and the UN reforms. India has supported the restructuring of the UN on several grounds. It believes that a strengthened and revitalized UN is desirable in a changing world. India also supports an enhanced role for the UN in promoting development and cooperation among states. India believes that development should be central to the UN's agenda, as it is a vital precondition for the maintenance of international peace and security. One of the India's major concerns has been the composition of the Security Council, which has remained largely static while the UN General Assembly membership has expanded considerably. India considers that this has harmed the representative character of the Security Council. It also argues that an expanded council with more representation will enjoy greater support in the world community. We should keep in mind that the membership of the UN Security Council was expanded from 11 to 15 in 1965, but there was no change in the number of permanent members. Since then, the size of the council has remained stationary. The fact remains that the overwhelming majority of the UN General Assembly members now are developing countries. Therefore, India argues that they should also have a role in shaping the decisions in the Security Council which affect them. India supports an increase in the number of both permanent and non-permanent members. Its representatives have argued that the activities of the Security Council have greatly expanded in the past few years. The success of the Security Council's actions depends upon the political support of the international community. Any plan for restructuring of the Security Council should therefore be broad based. For example, the Security Council should have more developing countries in it. Not surprisingly, India itself also wishes to be a permanent member in a restructured UN. India is the most populous country in the world, comprising almost one-fifth of the world population. Moreover, India is also the world's largest democracy. India has participated in virtually all of the initiatives of the UN. Its role in the UN's peacekeeping efforts is a long and substantial one. The country's economic emergence on the world stage is another factor that perhaps justifies India's claim to a permanent seat in the Security Council. India has also made regular financial contributions to the UN and never faltered on its payments. India is aware that permanent membership of the Security Council also has symbolic importance. It signifies a country's growing importance in world affairs. This greater status is an advantage to a country in the conduct of its foreign policy. The reputation for being powerful makes you more influential. Despite India's wish to be a permanent veto-wielding member of the UN, some countries question its inclusion. Neighboring Pakistan, with which India has troubled relations, is not the only country that is reluctant to see India become a permanent veto member of the Security Council. Some countries, for instance, are concerned about India's nuclear weapons capabilities. Others think that its difficulties with Pakistan will make India ineffective as a permanent member. Yet, others feel that if India is included, then other emerging powers will have to be accommodated, such as Brazil, Germany, Japan, perhaps even South Africa, whom they oppose. There are those who feel that Africa and South America must be represented in any expansion of the permanent membership, since those are the only continents not to have representation in the present structure. Given these concerns, it may not be very easy for India or anyone else to become a permanent member of the UN in the near future. The UN in a unipolar world. Among the concerns about the reform and restructuring of the UN has been the hope of some countries that changes could help the UN cope better within a unipolar world in which the US was the most powerful country without any serious rivals. Can the UN serve as a balance against US dominance? Can it help maintain a dialogue between the rest of the world and the US and prevent America from doing whatever it wants? US power cannot be easily checked. First of all, with the disappearance of the Soviet Union, the US stands as the only superpower. Its military and economic power allow it to ignore the UN or any other international organization. Secondly, within the UN, the influence of the US is considerable. As the single largest contributor to the UN, the US has unmatched financial power. The fact that the UN is physically located within the US territory gives Washington additional sources of influence. The US also has many nationals in the UN bureaucracy. In addition, with its veto power, the US can stop any moves that it finds annoying or damaging to its interest or the interest of its friends and allies. The power of the US and its veto within the organization also ensure that Washington has a considerable degree of say in the choice of the Secretary General of the UN. The UN can and does use this power to split the rest of the world and to reduce opposition to its policies. The UN is not therefore a great balance to the US. Nevertheless, in a unipolar world in which the US is dominant, the UN can and has served to bring the US and the rest of the world into discussions over various issues. US leaders, in spite of their frequent criticism of the UN, do see the organization as serving a purpose in bringing together over 190 nations in dealing with conflict and social and economic development. As for the rest of the world, the UN provides an arena in which it is possible to modify US attitudes and policies. While the rest of the world is rarely united against Washington, and while it is virtually impossible to balance US power, the UN does provide a space within which arguments against specific US attitudes and policies are heard and compromises and concessions can be shaped. The UN is an imperfect body, but without it, the world would be worse off. Given the growing connections and links between societies and issues, what we often call interdependence, it is hard to imagine how more than 7 billion people would live together without an organization such as the UN. Technology promises to increase planetary interdependence, and therefore the importance of the UN will only increase. Peoples and governments will have to find ways of supporting and using the UN and other international organizations in ways that are consistent with their own interests and the interests of the international community more broadly. IMF, the International Monetary Fund, is an international organization that oversees those financial institutions and regulations that act at the international level. The IMF has 190 member countries as on 19 February 2024, but they do not enjoy an equal say. The G7 members, US 16.52%, Japan 6.15%, Germany 5.32%, France 4.03%, UK 4.03%, Italy 3.02%, and Canada 2.22% have 41.29% of the votes. China 6.09%, India 2.64%, Russia 2.59%, Brazil 2.22%, and Saudi Arabia 2.02% are the other major members. World Bank. The World Bank was created during the Second World War in 1944. Its activities are focused on the developing countries. It works for human development, education, health, agriculture and rural development, irrigation, rural services, environmental protection, pollution reduction, establishing and enforcing regulations, infrastructure, roads, urban regeneration, electricity, and governance, anti-corruption, development of legal institutions. It provides loans and grants to the member countries in this way. It exercises enormous influence on the economic policies of developing countries. It is often criticized for setting the economic agenda of the poorer nations, attaching stringent conditions to its loans and forcing free market reforms. WTO, the World Trade Organization, is an international organization which sets the rules for global trade. This organization was set up in 1995 as the successor to the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs GATT, created after the Second World War. It has 164 members as on 29 July 2016. All decisions are taken unanimously, but the major economic powers such as the US, EU, and Japan have managed to use the WTO to frame rules of trade to advance their own interests. The developing countries often complain of non-transparent procedures and being pushed around by big powers. IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency (IAEA), was established in 1957. It came into being to implement US President Dwight Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace proposal. It seeks to promote the peaceful use of nuclear energy and to prevent its use for military purposes. IAEA teams regularly inspect nuclear facilities all over the world to ensure that civilian reactors are not being used for military purposes. Amnesty International. Amnesty International is an NGO that campaigns for the protection of human rights all over the world. It promotes respect for all the human rights in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It believes that human rights are interdependent and indivisible. It prepares and publishes reports on human rights. Governments are not always happy with these reports since a major focus of Amnesty is the misconduct of government authorities. Nevertheless, these reports play an important role in research and advocacy on human rights. Human Rights Watch. Human Rights Watch is another international NGO involved in research and advocacy on human rights. It is the largest international human rights organization in the US. It draws the global media's attention to human rights abuses. It helped in building international coalitions like the campaigns to ban landmines, to stop the use of child soldiers, and to establish the International Criminal Court. Keep learning, keep smiling. Do your best, leave the rest.